A homeless boy taught a billionaire's daughter, and when her father discovered them, what he did was absolutely unimaginable. A bitter wind rattled the iron gates of the Whitmore estate, where polished cars usually rolled through without a glance at the city's forgotten souls. But on this winter morning, a boy crouched by the curb, his knees drawn close against the cold stone, a stick of chalk scratching against the concrete. His coat was torn, his sneakers barely holding together. Yet his hand moved with steady precision as he filled the sidewalk with numbers and equations that most adults would have stumbled over. His name was Noah Carter, 14, homeless, invisible to nearly everyone but the frost in the air. From the back seat of a glossy black town car, 12-year-old Claire Whitmore pressed her forehead to the glass. Her world was chauffeurs, piano lessons, and silent dinners where her father's phone spoke louder than he did. She should have been scrolling on her tablet, but something about the boy on the curb pulled her eyes. She saw him pause, rub his sleeve against the pavement, then begin again, solving problems in the snow-dusted dust like the sidewalk itself was his classroom. Claire leaned forward. "Stop the car," she whispered. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror, uneasy. "Miss Whitmore, we'll be late for your lesson." "Stop," she insisted, and for the first time, her voice carried the same unyielding authority she had inherited from her father. The car slowed to a reluctant halt. She stepped out, boots crunching, her designer coat a sharp contrast to the boy's frayed hoodie. Noah froze, chalk trembling in his hand. He had learned not to expect kindness from people in polished coats. But instead of walking past, the girl crouched, her hair falling loose from its velvet bow. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Math," he said softly, as though ashamed to admit it. She tilted her head, studying the scrawled equation. "That's 8th grade algebra. I'm still in 6th. He blinked, uncertain if she was mocking him. "It's easy if you know the trick," her eyes lit. "Then show me." For the first time in months, Noah smiled. He brushed the sidewalk clean and began to explain, his finger tracing invisible numbers as he spoke. His voice was rough but steady, carrying the same clarity his late mother once praised. She had told him knowledge was the one thing no one could steal. Claire followed every step, her brow furrowed, then slowly lifting in wonder. When she solved the final number on her own, she let out a laugh that startled even her driver. It was a laugh Noah hadn't heard in years, unguarded, bright, the kind his mother once said meant, "The world hasn't broken you yet." But behind them, the driver's hand tightened on his phone. He watched this strange exchange with the weight of duty. In the Whitmore household, there were rules. The daughter of a billionaire was not to mix with the streets, especially not with boys like this. The message he typed was simple, direct, and would change everything. "Sir, your daughter is talking to a homeless boy." The text reached Richard Whitmore before his car even left midtown traffic. Sitting in the back of his bulletproof SUV, the billionaire pinched the bridge of his nose as the screen lit up. The words were sharp and invasive. "Your daughter is talking to a homeless boy outside the estate." His jaw tightened. To most, Richard Whitmore was a titan, self-made, ruthless, the kind of man who could turn an empty warehouse into a fortune with a single phone call. But beneath the surface of his empire, there was a fear that stalked him more than any competitor: vulnerability. He glanced at the photo attachment. The driver had discreetly snapped it. There was Claire, his only child, crouched beside a boy in ragged clothes, chalk dust smudged on his hands. For a second, Richard's chest clenched, not with anger, but with recognition. He knew that look on the boy's face, the sharp hunger in his eyes, not for food, but for survival through knowledge. He had seen it once in a mirror many years ago, before he clawed his way out of poverty with nothing but cunning and fury. The memory rushed him back. A damp basement in Brooklyn, his mother sewing buttons onto shirts while he scribbled calculations by candlelight, swearing one day he would never beg again. He had buried that boy beneath layers of wealth, polished suits, and boardroom victories. But seeing him again, alive in another child, made his chest twist with something dangerously close to guilt. He snapped the phone shut. "Driver, home now." Meanwhile, at the gates, Noah was sketching triangles when Claire interrupted with a question. "Do you ever go to school?" He shook his head, embarrassed. "Not anymore. Since my mom—" He stopped, throat tightening. He never spoke about her, not even to the shelters that turned him away. But Claire's eyes were so unguarded, so curious, that the truth slipped out. "She used to teach me. Said I was her little professor. She got sick, though." Real sick after she... His voice trailed. The word died hanging unspoken in the winter air. Claire's small hand fidgeted with the bow on her coat. "I'm sorry," she whispered. She wanted to tell him about her own mother, a memory that lived only in photographs. Her laugh, the smell of lavender perfume before the car crash took her away. But the words stuck. No one in her house spoke of loss. Loss was weakness. The sudden growl of engines shattered their fragile moment. A convoy of black SUVs rolled up the street, windows tinted, wheels crunching against the curb. The driver straightened immediately, tucking his phone away, and Claire's smile faltered. Noah instinctively scrambled back as though expecting to be chased off. The back door opened and Richard Whitmore stepped out, tailored suit pressed sharp as his stare. His presence was the kind that made grown men lower their voices, but now it was directed at a daughter who dared to disobey him, and at a boy who looked like a ghost from a past he thought buried. Claire swallowed hard. "Daddy." "This is Noah. He was teaching me." The silence that followed was heavier than the engines still running. Richard's eyes locked on the boy's chalk-stained hands, then shifted to his daughter's eager face. For a moment, the billionaire said nothing, his thoughts hidden behind an expression that could have meant fury, or something far more dangerous. Richard's polished shoes clicked against the pavement as he stepped closer, his gaze fixed on Noah. The boy shrank instinctively, clutching his battered notebook to his chest as though it were a shield. He had learned to read danger in men's eyes, and this man's eyes were made of glass and steel, reflecting everything, feeling nothing. "Claire," Richard said, his tone low, controlled. "Inside now." She shook her head, her chin quivering but stubborn. "No, Daddy, he was teaching me. I asked him to." Richard's jaw ticked. Rarely did anyone defy him. Boardrooms, politicians, competitors all bent eventually. Yet here was his 12-year-old daughter rooted in defiance. He turned his eyes back to Noah. "What's your name, boy?" Noah hesitated. Something in this man's presence made honesty feel like danger, but lying would only make it worse. Noah. Noah Carter. The name struck like a faint echo, but Richard masked the flicker of recognition before it showed. He took in the torn hoodie, the smudged sneakers, the thin wrists sticking out of two short sleeves. "And what business do you have teaching my daughter, Noah Carter?" Noah straightened, surprising even himself. "She asked me. I wasn't doing anything wrong." Richard's laugh was sharp, humorless. "Not doing anything wrong? You're a homeless boy scratching numbers on my sidewalk. Do you have any idea who she is?" "Yes." Noah's voice trembled but didn't break. "She's someone who wanted to learn. And I could teach her." Claire's voice cut through the winter air, trembling but loud. "He's better than all the tutors you bring, Daddy. He makes it make sense. He listens." The words pierced Richard more than he let on. He could silence CEOs, disarm senators, but from his daughter's lips they landed like an indictment. He saw her mother in her then, the same fiery glint that had once challenged him, the same softness that had been lost when her life was stolen on a rain-slicked highway. He waved his hand. Two security men stepped forward, their coats bulging slightly at the hip. Noah stepped back, pulse racing. He had been chased before, shoved from doorways, threatened with jail for loitering. But never had the threat come from a man whose world was as untouchable as this one. "Stop," Claire screamed, stepping in front of Noah. "If you take him away, I won't speak to you ever again." Her words froze the air. Richard's men hesitated, glancing at their boss. The girl's shoulders heaved, her breath visible in the cold, but she didn't move. For the first time in years, Richard saw his daughter not as a child, but as someone with a will sharpened against his neglect. The billionaire lifted a hand, dismissing the guards. His silence stretched, thick with something unreadable. "You think this boy can teach you?" His voice was low, almost dangerous. "Then let him prove it. In my house. Under my eye. But understand this, Claire, if he fails you, he will never set foot near you again." Noah's heart hammered. He didn't know whether this was mercy or a trap, but when Claire turned to him, her eyes shining with desperate hope, he knew one thing. He couldn't walk away. Richard looked at Noah once more, his gaze unreadable. For a fraction of a second, something almost like memory flickered in his eyes before he turned away. "Bring him in," he ordered. The Whitmore mansion loomed like a fortress of glass and stone, its high ceilings lit with chandeliers that scattered light across marble floors. Noah's sneakers squeaked as he stepped inside, the sound painfully out of place among polished silence. He clutched his notebook close, aware of every stare from the uniformed staff lined neatly along the walls. Their expressions were unreadable, but their eyes whispered the same thing. He doesn't belong here. Claire walked beside him with a kind of giddy triumph, her small hand brushing his as if she could tether him to her world. She had never brought anyone past these gates. Not friends from school, not even her cousins. To her, this moment felt like rebellion and freedom all at once. Richard strode ahead without looking back, his presence filling the grand hallway. He moved like a man used to owning every room he entered, yet his silence was more commanding than any speech. When he finally spoke, his voice echoed off the walls. "You will stay only as long as you prove useful. My daughter says you can teach." "We'll see." Noah's throat tightened, but he forced himself to nod. "Yes, sir." Richard's eyes lingered on him a beat longer than necessary. Something in the boy's features, sharp cheekbones, defiant gaze, scratched at memory. But he turned away, unwilling to entertain ghosts. As Claire led Noah toward the library, Noah's eyes darted across the expanse of the mansion. The paintings were old and commanding, portraits of ancestors he'd never heard of, faces that carried the same stern jawline as Richard. But it was the locked doors that caught Noah's attention. One, in particular, stood out at the end of the hall. A heavy oak door with an ornate brass handle. Unlike the others, it bore a keypad lock glowing faintly red. Claire noticed his stare and tugged his sleeve. "That's Daddy's office. We're not allowed in." The words were casual, but Noah caught the quick flicker in her eyes, curiosity mixed with fear. The kind of rule so absolute even she dared not test it. Inside the library, a fire crackled in a carved stone hearth, and shelves towered with books that smelled faintly of leather and dust. Claire climbed onto a velvet armchair, notebook in hand, waiting eagerly. "Okay, Professor Noah," she teased. "Show me something new." Noah smiled despite his nerves. He sketched out a problem on a spare page, his hand steady. Teaching her reminded him of nights under a dim lamp when his mother guided him through puzzles, her voice gentle even when her body was frail. He had promised himself then he would never stop learning, no matter where life dragged him. As Claire solved the equation, her laughter filled the room again. It was a sound so rare that even the maids passing by paused to listen. But from the doorway, Richard watched in silence, his face shadowed, unreadable. For the first time, he wasn't sure if bringing the boy inside was a mistake or the beginning of something he couldn't control. The next morning, Noah sat stiffly at the long oak table in the Whitmore dining hall. Crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier, and plates of food lay untouched before him. Salmon, eggs, toast stacked like it had been plated for a magazine. He had never seen so much food in his life, and his fingers twitched to reach for it, but Claire's excited chatter kept his mind distracted. Richard entered last, the silence falling as if every servant had been trained to stop breathing when he walked in. His gaze swept the table and landed on Noah, a flicker of distaste hidden beneath his composed exterior. He sat at the head, folded his hands, and without looking at his daughter said, "Eat." Noah picked at the toast. Claire smiled, deliberately crunching loudly, trying to make him feel less like an intruder. When the plates were cleared, Richard gestured toward the adjoining room. "Library now." They moved, Noah trailing Claire like a shadow. Inside, the billionaire's demeanor sharpened. He placed a calculus workbook on the table with a slap that echoed. "If you're to be in my house, you'll prove your worth." He flipped to a page of problems well beyond middle school level. "Solve this. 5 minutes." Claire's protest rose, but Richard silenced her with a glance. "If he's as gifted as you say, he'll manage." Noah's palms dampened. He stared at the equations, the symbols almost dancing. For a heartbeat, fear clawed at him, the fear of being laughed at, cast out humiliated. Then memory steadied him. His mother's voice on a thin mattress in their shelter whispering, "You can do hard things, Noah. The world can strip you of a home, of comfort, but not of what you carry in here." She tapped his forehead, smiling despite her hollow cheeks. The clock ticked. Noah bent over the page, pencil moving with bursts of clarity, piece by piece fitting the problem into place. The servants watched from the door, some expecting failure, others unable to look away from this fragile defiance against the master of the house. At the 4th minute, Noah placed the workbook down. The solution gleamed in neat, sharp handwriting. He pushed it toward Richard. Richard read silently, his jaw tightening. Correct, all of it. He said nothing, just snapped the book shut. Begin again tomorrow. Harder problems. He turned, already dismissing him. Claire threw her arms around Noah. You did it. I told you he's brilliant. Richard's stride faltered for the briefest second at her joy. The sound stirred something buried, a different child's laughter, smaller, echoing from years ago when his world was not yet golden but bitter with sacrifice. His face hardened quickly, hiding it. As they left, Noah's gaze snagged once more on the locked oak door at the end of the hall. It pulsed with a kind of importance he couldn't shake. Behind it lay something more dangerous than any test, something tied to the way Richard's eyes darkened whenever Noah spoke his mother's name. The boy didn't know it yet, but that locked door would one day rewrite everything he believed about who he was. Snow dusted the garden that stretched beyond the Whitmore mansion, the hedges trimmed into perfect symmetry. Claire tugged Noah by the sleeve, pulling him out into the chill. Come on, I'll show you the greenhouse, she said, her cheeks pink from excitement. Noah followed, still clutching his notebook. Out here, away from Richard's shadow, the air felt lighter. Inside the glass-paneled greenhouse, warmth and color wrapped around them. Rows of orchids, vines curling up poles, blossoms Claire's mother once adored. Mom used to spend hours here, Claire whispered. After the accident, Daddy locked it for a while. I sneak here sometimes. She pressed a petal between her fingers, her smile fragile. Noah listened quietly. He had learned that silence often carried more comfort than words. She must have loved you a lot, he said finally. Claire blinked back tears. I don't even remember her laugh anymore. Her gaze shifted. What about your mom? He hesitated, then opened his notebook to the first page. The handwriting was delicate, his mother's. Written before the sickness took her. Never stop learning. Promise me. His throat tightened. She was the one who taught me everything. Even when she was too tired to get out of bed, she'd make me solve problems. Said it kept me sharp. The words hung heavy, stitched with grief that mirrored her own, and in that shared silence something formed between them, an unspoken pact of survival. But the moment cracked when a shadow passed across the greenhouse glass. Richard stood outside, arms crossed, watching. His face revealed nothing, yet his eyes lingered on the notebook in Noah's hands like it carried a secret he wasn't ready to face. That evening, another test awaited. In the library, Richard placed 2 books before Noah. One of advanced physics, the other a dense tome on economics. Choose one, Richard said. Explain the first chapter to me as if I were a child. Noah's pulse raced. He knew numbers, logic, puzzles, but teaching in front of this man, that was a battlefield he hadn't expected. Still, he chose physics, flipping to diagrams of forces and motion. He remembered nights with his mother, balancing makeshift weights on cans, her smile when he understood. He drew on those memories, his voice trembling at first, but then growing steady as he explained motion through the story of a ball rolling down a hill. Claire giggled when he mimed it with an apple from the fruit bowl, and for a fleeting second, even Richard's lips twitched before hardening again. Acceptable, Richard muttered, snapping the book shut. He turned on his heel, but Noah caught something in his expression, something unsettled. Later, as Noah passed down the hall toward the guest room where he now stayed, his eyes locked once more on the oak office door with its glowing keypad. He paused, sensing its weight, the same way he could sense an unsolved equation. Claire noticed his stare and whispered, "Don't even think about it. Daddy would never forgive us." Noah said nothing, but deep down he knew. Answers were behind that door, and one day he would need them. The days bled into a rhythm of lessons and silent trials. Each morning, Noah braced himself for whatever new test Richard would devise. One day it was an advanced math theorem, the next an economics debate, then a physics explanation before a room full of Richard's stone-faced advisors. The boy passed each challenge, but the weight of them grew heavier, less about learning, more about breaking. Claire saw it too. At night, when they sat by the fire in the library, she would whisper, "He's trying to scare you off. Don't let him win." Noah would nod, though inside the doubt gnawed at him. Why did this man who had everything want so badly to see him fail? One evening, Richard raised the stakes. He placed a checkbook on the table, slid it across the polished wood toward Noah. Name your price, he said coldly. Take the money and leave my daughter alone. Noah stared at it, his chest tight. He thought of the shelters that had turned him away, the empty nights with hunger as his only company. $1,000 could buy warmth, food, maybe even a place to stay. But then Claire's hand brushed his beneath the table, grounding him. He pushed the checkbook back. I don't want your money, Noah said, his voice steady. I'm not here for that. Richard's eyes narrowed, but beneath the hardness flickered something else. An unease he quickly buried. He stood abruptly, dismissing them with a wave. Later, alone in his guest room, Noah stared at the ceiling, exhaustion pressing down. His mother's voice echoed faintly. Promise me you'll never let them buy who you are. He closed his eyes, gripping the notebook to his chest as though it were her hand still holding him steady. That night, curiosity gnawed stronger than ever. The oak office door glowed faintly down the hall, its keypad blinking red. Noah crept out, the house silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock. He paused at the door, fingertips grazing the brass handle. Behind it, he felt, were answers tied to Richard's hostility. Answers about why this man's gaze burned like recognition. Before he could linger longer, footsteps echoed. He darted back into the shadows as Richard himself emerged from the study. The billionaire's face was pale, weary, his hand clutching a photograph he didn't notice he was still holding. For a fleeting second, Noah caught a glimpse of the image. A woman smiling, her arms around a baby boy. His breath caught. The baby was him. He froze in place, heart hammering as Richard slipped the photo back inside before locking the door. Noah returned to his room, his mind racing. The pieces didn't fit yet, but the outline of the puzzle was there. Richard Whitmore knew him, somehow. And when morning came, the billionaire's stare was sharper than ever, as if daring him to keep digging. Noah couldn't focus during the morning lesson. Claire worked through an equation, her pencil tapping rhythmically, but his thoughts spun around the glimpse of that photograph. A smiling woman, a baby boy he was certain was himself, cradled in her arms. Every detail had branded itself into his mind. The curve of the woman's hair, the way Richard's hand trembled as he hid it away. Are you okay? Claire whispered, catching his distracted stare. He forced a smile, but inside his chest the questions thundered. Why would Richard Whitmore, a billionaire with a world built of steel and glass, keep a photograph of him? That evening, curiosity became unbearable. As Richard held a late meeting in the parlor, Noah crept again toward the office door. Claire followed, whispering nervously, We'll be caught. But Noah shook his head. There's something he's not telling us. I have to know. The keypad mocked him, numbers glowing. He reached, but the beeping of the lock froze him. A shadow cut across the hall. Richard stood there, his gaze sharp as broken glass. Go to bed, Richard said coldly. Claire tugged Noah away, heart pounding. But later, long after she slept, Richard remained in his study, the photo frame clutched in his hands. The firelight danced against his face, unmasking emotions he had buried for decades. The memories came whether he invited them or not. Brooklyn, 25 years ago. Richard was not yet a billionaire, not even close. He was a struggling college dropout, hauling crates by day, studying ledgers by night. He met a woman named Evelyn Carter, bright, determined, with a laugh that made his bleak basement room feel alive. For a brief season, they were inseparable. She believed in him before he believed in himself, but then came the choice. Richard was offered an opportunity, a ruthless business partnership that promised wealth but demanded sacrifice. Evelyn discovered she was pregnant. He begged her to take the money he could now provide and let him build his empire without the weight of a child. She refused. I don't want your money, she had said, her hand on her stomach. I want you to be a father. He walked away. The years that followed hardened him. He buried the memory under towers of glass and steel. Yet sometimes, alone in his study, he would take out the photograph of Evelyn with the infant boy she chose to raise without him. That boy was Noah. Back in the present, Richard pressed the photo face down on the desk, his jaw tight. He had abandoned his son once. Now fate had dragged the boy back into his world, into his daughter's life. When Noah entered the library the next morning, Richard's stare carried a new weight. The boy didn't know the truth yet, but Richard did. Every equation Noah solved, every defiant glance, was a reminder of what he had lost and the unimaginable choice he would soon be forced to make. The tension in the Whitmore mansion had grown thick enough to suffocate. Lessons with Claire still filled the afternoons with laughter, but Noah could feel the walls closing in. Richard's stare lingered longer, colder, as if daring him to stumble. And yet, beneath that icy exterior, Noah sensed something else, a weight that wasn't anger but guilt. One night, unable to hold it in, Noah followed Richard into the library. The fire burned low, throwing shadows across the bookshelves. Richard poured a glass of scotch, not bothering to acknowledge him until Noah spoke. "Why do you have a photograph of my mother?" The words cracked the silence. Richard froze mid-sip, the glass trembling slightly before he set it down. His back stiffened, his jaw clenched, but he didn't turn. "You shouldn't have seen that." Noah stepped closer, his voice rising. "I didn't just see it, I recognized it. That was me in her arms. You knew her. You knew me." Richard turned slowly, his eyes glinting like steel under firelight. "You're mistaken." "No." Noah's voice broke, but he held his ground. "I remember her telling me about a man she loved once. A man who left. She never said your name, but I see it now. The way you look at me, it's like you're looking at a ghost." Richard's chest heaved. For a long, excruciating moment, he said nothing. Then his voice, low and sharp, "Yes, Evelyn was your mother, and I was the man who walked away." The truth landed like a blow to the gut. Noah staggered, gripping the edge of a chair. His heart pounded so hard it hurt. "You—" His throat closed, the words strangled between rage and disbelief. "You left her. You left me." "I gave her a choice," Richard snapped, though the bitterness in his tone was directed more inward than outward. "She chose poverty over wealth. She chose to raise you without me. And I—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "I built this empire." Noah's eyes burned. "While we starved. While she died sick and alone." The words pierced like knives, and for once Richard had no answer. His gaze fell to the floor, his shoulders heavy with a shame he had buried for decades. But in the doorway, a gasp broke the air. Claire stood there, her small hands clutching the frame, her face pale. She had heard it all. "You abandoned him?" Her voice cracked. "You abandoned us?" Richard spun toward her, panic flashing across his face, but the damage was done. Tears welled in her eyes, anger trembling in her voice. "All this time you told me family mattered. You told me loyalty mattered. And you left your own son on the streets?" Richard took a step, but she recoiled. Noah's chest ached at her tears, more painful than his own rage. She looked between them, betrayal and grief tearing at her young face. For the first time in his life, Richard Whitmore was not the man in control. He was a father stripped bare, exposed by his own children. The mansion was silent, but the silence felt like thunder. Claire stood trembling at the library doorway, tears streaking down her cheeks. Her eyes locked on the father she no longer recognized. Richard reached for her, but she pulled back, her small voice sharp as glass. "You don't get to call yourself a good father if you abandoned your own son." The words sliced deeper than any business defeat. Richard, the man who conquered markets and crushed rivals, found himself defenseless before a child's accusation. He turned, his gaze colliding with Noah's. The boy's fists were clenched, his chest rising and falling with the fury of years spent hungry, unseen, forgotten. "You want to test me?" Noah's voice cracked but grew stronger. "You've been testing me every day since I walked in here. Math, physics, books, none of it mattered. You just wanted me to fail like you failed me." He took a step forward, eyes blazing. "But I didn't fail. I survived. I taught myself when no one else would. I taught her when all you gave her was silence." Claire's sob echoed in the room. Richard's composure fractured. He saw Evelyn's eyes in Noah's defiance, heard her voice in Claire's trembling grief. The empire he had built suddenly felt like dust, a monument that meant nothing compared to the two faces staring back at him. He sank into the leather chair behind his desk, the weight of decades collapsing onto his shoulders. For the first time in years, his voice was stripped bare. "I was a coward," he whispered. "I thought money could erase the past. I thought if I kept building, I'd never have to face what I left behind." He looked at Noah, his eyes wet, unguarded. "But I see it every time I look at you." Noah's throat tightened, torn between rage and the ache of a boy who had once prayed for a father to appear. Claire placed her small hand on his arm, anchoring him. She looked at her father, her voice steady despite her tears. "If you really mean that, then prove it. Not with money, not with power. Prove it by being better, by being here." The silence stretched. Richard's empire had been built on impossible bargains, ruthless deals. But this was different. This was not a deal he could buy or win. This was forgiveness he had to earn. He stood slowly, his hand trembling as he reached out, not with command, but with hesitation. Noah, I don't deserve it. But I'm asking, will you let me try? Noah's eyes burned. He thought of his mother's notebook, of her words. Never stop learning. Promise me, maybe learning didn't just mean equations. Maybe it meant learning how to forgive too. He didn't take Richard's hand, not yet. But he didn't turn away either. You want to prove something? Noah said softly. Then don't prove it to me. Prove it to her. He glanced at Claire, who stood between them, her gaze fierce and hopeful. Richard bowed his head, humbled by the only two voices that mattered. For the first time, he wasn't Richard Whitmore, the billionaire. He was just a father, broken, flawed, but still standing. And in that moment, Noah realized he didn't need the man's fortune to define him. He had already won. He had taught Claire, and he had forced Richard to see what truly mattered. The unimaginable had happened. Not a punishment, not revenge, but a chance at redemption.